The tools needed for this assembly are a 9/16 and a 7/16 wrench, and also a 5/32 and a 7/32 hex wrench. Your rack is going to arrive with the following parts per rack. When you get this rack, you'll have to disassemble a couple of zip ties, clip them, and take the parts and separate them. In total, you will have a lower rack, you'll have the upper rack with the arm and head unit, and the slide wheel. Also, you'll have the closure handle, and you'll have a bag full of parts. And we'll begin putting the rack together. The first thing that you want to do when assembling your rack, you'll take your upper rack and rotate it flat on a table like this. Step one will be to take apart the 4 screws that were provided. So take the nut off of the screws and take the bushings off. Take the lower rack, and we'll be putting a bushing in the top hole on each side of the lower rack. Each bushing should slightly poke out on the other side. 2 washers were provided with your rack. You'll want to put those washers just over the inside of each one of those bushings. Oops. The bushing should stick out just enough to hold on to that washer. On one side, the bushing will stick out slightly farther than the other. Lay this portion of the rack, which is the head unit. It has a rotating arm on it. Rotate that flat, have the head unit flat with the brackets facing up. It sits pretty stable on a table. With your lower part of the rack, you have your 2 washers over your bushings. Just lower those down, get one side in, kind of spread it apart, get the other side in, and just push it down. And it'll slide right on in. So then, holding it together with your thumb, rotate it on the side. Now you'll grab one of your bolts and you'll line up that with the center hole in the bracket, just like that. And do that on both sides. After you line up the center hole with the bolt, put your nut on just finger tight. Now go to the other side. Push your bolt through. And just finger tight with the nut on this side as well. So now your lower rack is attached to the center point of the bracket. You should be able to rotate it like this, and you'll see the lower hole on the lower part of the rack will be visible. In the lower hole, you'll put your bushing on each side. Put one bushing on each side, filling in the lower hole. That needs to go all the way through. Once the bushings are in place, make sure they're centered with the bracket so that they can slide down inside, and just rotate it down into position. Again, flip on its side. Now this bolt sometimes needs to be threaded in. It can be a little bit more difficult to line that second hole. Sometimes you want to use your tool and go ahead and just twist it in there to help get it through. There we go. Flip it over. Put the other bolt in. Now that we've got these 2 bolts in position, we'll want to put on our nut finger tight again. And that's it. Now we've got the lower rack attached to the upper rack. Okay, we want to then go ahead and tighten down these bolts. When you tighten down these bolts, you don't want them to be extremely tight, they just need to be snugged up. Just a little bit. They have lock washers, nylon lock washers on each nut. So the nut isn't going to just fall off. It doesn't need to be super tight and it'll still stay secure. Just kind of snug it up. Check your top arm, maybe give it a little snug as well. The top arm comes pre-installed, but we left it just a little bit loose so that it wouldn't squeeze the clamp and make it difficult to get the lower part on. So it's good to just go check it and maybe snug it up a little bit. But don't do that until you get the lower arm or the lower part of your rack installed in. Like I said, if you squeeze this before you put the lower part in, then it can make it difficult for this part to get through because it closes this in a little bit. And everything has got a pretty tight fit. The next step in assembly will be to put on your closing arm. So the closing arm comes pre-assembled. It has this bolt already assembled on. There's a specific order to this bolt and all of the parts that are arranged on the bolt. You have a bolt, a washer, you have the clamping arm, then you have another washer, then you have a spacer, and then you have the nut. So you can just loosen the nut, take it off, and then you put it onto the rack. You'll notice that the handle will come in such a configuration that it's going to mount specifically to one side or the other on the rack. The racks or the handles are reversible, so by taking off these two bolts we can reverse the handle, and I'll show you how to do that at the end of the video. But for now, most of the racks, if you bought a single rack, are going to come set up so that the rack and the handle is positioned towards the outside of the truck on the driver's side if you bought a single rack. If you bought two racks, then we will give you one that's set up for the driver's side and one will be set up for the passenger side. So depends on how you want it set up. You might not like that. You might want to reverse it. So we have the option for you to be able to take it apart and reposition it however you would like. We'll lift the upper arm and just put it right through the hole. Just like that. And then go ahead and finger tight the nut onto the bolt. Then we'll go ahead and tighten it up. You'll want to tighten this up just enough that it gives some tension when you move it. You don't want it super tight so that it's locked on there so that it won't swivel. You want it to be able to move. So check it, make sure that the handle moves, and that feels pretty good. It's got a little movement, but it's not super loose. So that's about right. Now we can just take the arm, bring it down, and you'll notice that the bracket is offset. Find the natural position and bring the arm down right through the bracket. You shouldn't have to push it or pull it to one side or the other. It should just go right in between the bracket. You'll open up your safety pin and put it right through the hole. It might require the first time just a little bit of working it through the paint, but once you get it through, it should come in and out pretty easily. Close the pin over the top, and you're all set. Now you have your arm set up so that it's working. The next step will be to put on the roller slide. To do this, you want to line up both parts, start to slide them together, and you'll feel them immediately hit a pin right here. This is the pin that locks into the holes. You'll just want to pull that up and slide it on a bit more. Get it past that pin so that now you can let go of it and it'll start to slide. You don't want to hit it hard because it'll knock these back pieces out and you can break them. So you want to slide it in gently until you feel it might catch a little bit. Kind of walk them over the top of the bar. They'll kind of get over the top if you just kind of shake them on. Once you get them on, that's it. It's going to lock into position. And now you're all set. You can go ahead and pull that pin, slide it, lock it into whichever position you like. And then just leave that for now. Make sure and put your end caps onto the back of the bar. Okay, you're almost done. Now your rack is almost complete. The only step left is to go ahead and put on some of the final touches. Your rack was provided with some small black caps. These small black caps are meant to cover the top of the Allen bolts that you see exposed on the brackets here. A nice way to put on these plastic caps is just to use the back of your hand. Get the cap started, put the back of your hand on there, and then just give it some pressure and it'll snap on. Sometimes they're a little bit harder to snap on. It might require a light tap with like a rubber mallet or something. Just be careful. If you hit them hard with a hammer, they'll shatter. So you don't want to shatter them. But usually the back of your hand will work. Just get it in there, snap it on. Your rack will have come with a few more parts that will be needed for installation. One of the parts, you'll have two of these rubber square pieces, and these are designed to go in a very specific orientation. You'll see a deep groove, the wider, deeper groove on the bottom. So that groove should be facing downward, and then there will be another slot that will be facing backwards. So the deep, wide groove should always face down. And then there's a flange here, so the deep groove is designed to go over the top of the nut that's inside of the head unit. So it should slide right in like that, and the opposite side will slide in on this side. Okay, the other parts that come with the rack are your quick clamps. And so with the quick clamp comes with a little nut on the end. You just go ahead and take that nut off, and then you can just throw that away. You won't need that. That just is to hold the parts together, and we won't be using it. So you go ahead and take those, and those will go through the top here, and they thread into the nut below. But you won't really need that until you install it into your truck.